I'm here with Robert, who does the historical tours of Greater Holyoke, which include the canals, churches, cemeteries, reservoirs, parks, and streets in Holyoke, Chicopee, and South Hadley, Massachusetts. His website is holyokecanaltour.org, and his email address where you can email him further is bobcat4214, capital B, at yahoo.com. Again, that's BOBCAT 4214, capital B, at yahoo.com. So we're going to be talking about the Precious Blood Church tour that you give. So what happened in 1875 to the first Precious Blood Church?
Well, sadly, they made that church all out of wood, and they didn't treat the wood, but what they did do, they put curtains totally over all the wood to make it look like a good scene. So you can imagine a wood structure covered totally with the walls with curtains, all the walls. Now, they built it in 1869. By 1875, that's 6 years of drying out non-treated wood and with draperies all over. So a candle was out in front to the left, and it was a bit hot that day, so they opened the windows, and the wind blew the candle up higher into the curtains. The curtains were very dry, the wood was very dry. You can imagine what happened. It caught the wall on fire, then it caught the whole building on fire. There were about 400 people maybe inside the structure. Maybe 250 of them were young women, young girls, because they were desirable in the mills, and they had come down from Quebec. This was an ethnic group from Quebec that loved to have their own masses and their own church. And the fire was so drastic that by the end, 70 people would die from that fire. They wouldn't all die that day. Most died that day from the fire, but some would die in the days, the weeks, and the months afterwards due to the injuries from the fire. It was very sad seeing the school behind it, the Park Street School, was used as a morgue, and people were able to identify them. I have a research project going, and it's going to be trying to identify who all these people were. They know the names, but I'm trying to find the birth records of each one to get their correct names and correct birth dates. Too bad it had to happen, but...
Now, what was the Precious Blood Church campus like, and what remains?
Well, after that fire, the church grew to great size. They built a brick church that already had a foundation by 1875, but they finished it off and had a beautiful Precious Blood Church, which lasted till 1989. So it lasted over 100, up to 110 years. Now, they also built, across the street from the original church was a boys and girls school and a convent. Those are long gone because by the late 1880s, a boys' school was built along Southeast Street, and it was a very big school, and lots of boys went to the Precious Blood School. Also, by the 1890s, they started the Precious Blood High School, and that they put into the Hamilton Street School, and it was then kindergarten up to 12th grade. By the 19-teens, the girls had left their own school and went in with the boys' school. And also, there was a new convent, not built from scratch, but put into the Park Street School. So you had a very large complex with about 1,000 students at its height. And like most Catholic schools, it started going downhill, especially from 1960s onwards. The elementary schools closed 1968, and the high schools closed 1972. So if you go out there now, what remains is the rectory, which is now a home for addicted men who want to get their lives improved, and also the original Park Street School, which was made into convent, is still there, and that houses Kate's Kitchen in the basement, where you can have a free meal if you want to. So it's still a beautiful place to walk around, and I give tours of it.
Now, why are the Catholic churches at Holyoke vast in sight, whereas the Protestant campus is small?
Well, Holyoke is probably the most Catholic of all communities in the United States. And the reason why is because being an industrial city, it attracted lots of mill workers. A lot of them came from Ireland or from Quebec, very Catholic places. And most of the United States is Protestant, except there's only, I believe, 6 states that are majority Catholic, but only 4 of those were majority Catholic from 100 to 200 years ago. And those were Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, and New York State. And so why would you have such a vast Catholic population in Holyoke? The reason why so many mill workers came in from these places, and you didn't have that in other places. Other mill cities, mill towns had only a small portion of mill workers, whereas Holyoke was made fully industrialized in a gridded pattern where you could put homes, and it built up to the point that most of the people were Catholic. It's an incredible fact.
Now, where are the burials of precious blood parishioners?
They are in South Hadley, Massachusetts, not in Holyoke, at the Precious Blood Cemetery, which is near the corner of Route 202 and 33. And it's a small cemetery, but if you go into it, you'll see the original priest that served the church was Andre Dufresne. His gravestone has been moved from Holyoke when the church was taken down in 1989. And where, if you find his stone, which is large, below him are 48 burials from the original 70 people that died. Across from him is a memorial stone with a walkway, and if you go up to the back of the memorial stone, you'll see listed of the burials. They give 78 burials, but it should only be 70 people that died from that fire. And on that beautiful monument, you see it's also raised above the scenery. And below that, some more of the burials that happened later in the days, the weeks, and the months afterwards from the fire. And also there's many charity burials around the area. And in one corner, you have 2 friends that were buried who died during the Spanish-American War, Joseph Bonneville and Anatole Duguay. And those are my family burials. And it's a fun cemetery to walk around with. Again, it's not very large, but it's still open to people that already own a deed or a plot there. Okay, so thank you for listening to my podcast, and I hope you go on the tour of the cemetery when I have one.
Thank you, Robert. And again, he does the historical tours of Greater Holyoke, including canals, churches, cemeteries, reservoirs, parks, and streets in Holyoke, Chicopee, and South Hadley, Mass. His website is holyokecanaltour.org. And his email address is bobcat4214, capital B, at yahoo.com. Again, that's BOBCAT4214, capital B, at yahoo.com. Thank you very much. It's going to be about the Precious Blood Cemetery. Now, Rob, which is your favorite gravestone in the Precious Blood Cemetery of South Hadley, Mass?
My favorite stone in that cemetery is a joint 2 stones together, where in 1879 in the summer, 2 friends from the South Holyoke part of Holyoke, Massachusetts, died during the Spanish-American War. And they were buried originally in Cuba, where they had died. But the veterans groups around Holyoke didn't like that idea that these 2 men were left behind in Cuba, and their many compatriots came back. 7 men from Holyoke died during that 1898 war. 1 died the next year, 1899, in the Philippines in the continuation of the Spanish-American War. So these veterans, I believe 4 are still buried elsewhere and 4 are buried in Holyoke that died during the Spanish-American War. Joseph Bonneville and Anatole Duguay, 2 men from Quebec ethnicity. They had been friends as young boys. They had grown up a street apart in South Holyoke, and they were brought back in 1898 and buried in the Precious Blood Cemetery of South Hadley, Massachusetts. and they're now side by side with similar stones, and their stones starting to wear out, so they're hard to read. But you can still, if you look closely at them, you can still make out what's there. Especially if you know the names. I'm telling you the names. I've looked up their information. I found a story about their reburial, and so it's an incredible fact. And they're beautiful stones. They're in the northwest corner, next to the entry road, and so they're pretty easy to find, and they're bright white. So next question.
Now, can you tell us about the Precious Blood Church fire?
Yes, that fire happened in 1875, and the wooden church had burnt to the ground that night of May 29th. And the sad part is 70 people died. Most of the families selected to have them buried in the Precious Blood Cemetery in South Hadley. And they were in a mass grave, each with their individual coffin. Each had their own horse and buggy take them to South Hadley on their burial day, 3 days after the fire. Each had their coffin and were put into the ground. They are all put in the same hole, so it's a very large hole dug, but they each had their resting place on the grounds, so they weren't buried on top of each other. In the days and the weeks following, some more died, and they were buried nearby. These were probably the second time any person was ever buried in the Precious Blood Cemetery. And the cemetery has grown up since then. That fire did not destroy the spirit, and the campus of Precious Blood grew to great size and became one of the most important churches of Holyoke. It's gone mostly now, but that fire is still remembered in the cemetery, but memorial stone on the front it says we will not forget them, and in the back has the names of the people. I'm doing a research project where I'm starting to find all the birth records of these 70 people. Next question.
Now, what has happened to the gravestone of Andre Dufresne?
Andre Dufresne, he was the priest that was there during the fire. He was the first pastor of Precious Blood Church. And when he died, his body was put in front of the church to the northeast side. What a large memorial stone to honor him. That was there for 103 years until 1989, when the church was being taken down. And also along that way, the sidewalk had been built wider by the city of Holyoke, and it came very close to his gravestone. So in 1989, they decided to take his body and his stone and put it into Precious Blood Cemetery, and they raised the earth above where the original parishioners who died in the fire were buried. They raised it so that they can put his coffin above all the other people, and then raised it so there's 6 feet of earth above him, and then they put his gravestone on top of that. And they faced it towards the memorial stone that was maybe about 60, 70 feet away on a sidewalk. And so you have a great sight of his stone facing the memorial stone. Next.
Okay, now what research are you doing currently on the Precious Blood Cemetery?
Yes, 70 people had died because of that fire in 1875. I'm finding their birth dates, their marriage dates, if they did get married, and their death dates. The death dates were easy to find. I'm also finding where they're buried. Most were buried in the Precious Blood Cemetery. Some were buried elsewhere. 10 people were brought back to Quebec and buried there. 3 people were buried in Holyoke at St. Jerome's, and 1 person was buried in Brattleboro, another in Greenfield, and I'm finding all these burial locations. The marriage locations, I found 17 of the 18. I got 1 more to find. 18 people were married out of that 70 number. Now, all 70 I'm going to find the birth records for. So far, I have 66 of them found. I got 4 more to go. The ones that are left are very hard. So I'm using all my abilities. I've been doing genealogy for about 30 years as a hobby, and I have great ability to find, especially information in Quebec to find out their baptism and birth information. And then I build a tree on Ancestry.com for each person. So I have over 60 trees going for them. And I also attach all the burials on findagrave.com to their parents. So I try to find where their parents are buried and when. So this is a big research project. I've already put in maybe 200 hours into it, and I hope to finish it within 2 years for the anniversary of the fire.
Now, are there any more interesting stones in the cemetery?
Yes, there's one more interesting stone that I'd like to see. There's a very large paupers section, and in that pauper section is a stone that's very modern, and the family is the Bernash family. And the Bernash family had 4 children die the same day, and they were buried in the pauper section, but someone has put up since that date a memorial stand for them. Sadly, the father had gone out, the mother was working that night in the mill, father had gone out to get some food, and when he came back, the apartment was on fire. And he ended up killing 4 of the 5 children that they had. The eldest boy had been out working too, and he came back before the father, and he tried to put out the fire, but 4 little children had died that day. So in this cemetery, there's lots of interesting stories. I can go on and on, but you can take the tour of the cemetery when it comes up. I hope to give a tour there in 2 years, in the year 2025, which will be the 150th anniversary of that fire. Thank you.